Bridget Cogley, I work at Tekion Data Solutions. I am a senior consultant there. I am a 5-time Tableau Zen master, but I started my career in American Sign Language interpreting, kind of driving all over the place, really doing a lot of interpretation. I got in with a startup and started working out from a business side. So, I mean, I went from kind of, I'm the interpreter to I was a trainer to managing folks to really starting working in reporting and, hey, we need somebody to do this. And so I kind of joke I've done every job possible in a business at least once, including payroll. I don't recommend doing that again, but I eventually found my way into Tableau and dashboard design. And so with that, I really started to think about how I was doing the work. And so I'll kind of jump through a little bit of this. And the goal of this presentation is really to think about how to build dashboards that require less explaining, reduce the amount of rework, ideally improve usage, and that to me is how I'm defining a better dashboard. So that is kind of the principles here. And what this boils into is 4 big ideas. And the 4 big ideas are setting the tone, working from large to small, answering a single question, and finally moving beyond the chart. And I'll explain all these in a bit. But first, I want to kind of go to a trajectory that may or may not be familiar. And this is kind of that, here's how we often start. We often start with kind of these dashboards and, start thinking about, okay, I've got, my KPIs that somebody told me they needed. I've got this, we want to look at sales, we want to look at profit. Got to have a map just because every time I've worked in biz, everyone's like, got to have the map. So we've got the map. We've also seen from Paul's presentation how useful maps can be. And then we've kind of got this profit graph. Well, we talk to our stakeholders, they say, that's great, still need more information. So you see, I'm going to drag things on here and start adding more information. And you'll notice I'm just kind of dropping things in here right now. And this is very much the path I went through when I was early in my career, very much, okay, I need to add more charts. I need to throw these things in here and maybe I'll line that up to here because that seems like a good spot. And you'll see it's kind of thrown on all these additional legends. And this is very much, how I started. And from there, I kind of said, okay, well, here's containers. You learn about containers where you can start putting them into containers nicely. You can kind of distribute the charts better within the view. And then you learn about, hey, did you know you can move legends and you can float them while you're tiling? And this is a great practice. And you can start putting them closer to the things that they're related to. And then I went on this journey of make it pretty, and this is something I hear, you hear, I'm sure a lot of folks here, if we got to make this a pretty dashboard. So here's the pretty dashboard. I've picked better colors. I've made it really pretty. I've got lots of pretty colors on here. I've got my dual axis color coded, and this was very much the path I went on as I was learning Tableau. And it was like, okay, great. I got to this point. But it's still just, it wasn't working with me. It wasn't resonating. And I was really struggling with, well, what's the next level? How do I, I've done all the things. I've figured out, the right charts, but now what? And so I went on this long journey several years ago now and looked at who does Viz well. And I mean, this is back in 2015, and I was looking around and stumbled upon this great visionary, Kelly Martin. And if you don't know her name, you absolutely should. vizcandy.blogspot.com. You should go read the whole blog, but she does wonderful work. And so I really looked at kind of what did she do? Like, how did the mechanics of all this work? Why does it look the way it did? And I went on this long discovery and talk about, pulling in a background of American Sign Language, really went back to some of my earlier work of what is language and, looking at Baker Schenck and Coakley's definition of what a language is. And I'm like, hey, there's a lot of overlap here. And I kind of had this epiphany in 2016. So Andy Cotgreave kind of redid this other dashboard Tableau had put out. The whole idea is, hey, you can make this really quick, simple, beautiful dashboard. And I was like, okay. And he put out a question to the community of, well, what would you do differently? And so I took it back and I played, and that really was kind of an awakening for me. That whole talk and discussion is documented out there. It's under Data Visualization Linguistics. It's on my blog. It's on TC16's talk track. And then if you really want to, you can certainly buy the book. More on that coming soon. So that was kind of the journey of figuring out, okay, here's, how to build the room and kind of talking to people. And one of the things I stumbled upon, and I'm testing this because I do think there's a potential of where coronavirus has actually maybe pivoted this. And so I'm going to ask for your participation. Feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to kind of document this, but I want you to think about it. I'm going to show you a room here in a second. I'm even going to pause talking and let you really look at this room and think about how you would describe it to someone else who's not looking at it. And so I'll jump to that room. Feel free to put this in the chat. You are contributing to my data collection. And then if any of the organizers want to maybe jump in and start reading some of the things they're saying, I unfortunately cannot get to the chat very easily.
Sure, I will. Okay, we're seeing modern conference room, open, spacious, tranquil, bright, natural, beautiful table, consistent coloring between the decorations, modern, rustic, a view of the city, nice view, cityscape, office meeting room, inviting, large windows, letting in lots of light.
Perfect. So I'll go ahead and kind of jump to, I want to think about as you started describing this room, where did you start? And I'll hold that out there for a second. When you think about we're describing this room, what was one of the first things you told somebody? And again, feel free to throw this in the chat. And then if somebody can kind of read off what we're seeing real quickly.
It
And
looks, oh, sorry, people are saying the overall feel.
Perfect. Okay. And so one of the things when I've given this live, and again, this is where I feel like coronavirus has potentially ruined my data set, so I may have to do this test somewhere else. But typically when I've had people describe the room, they start with the table, they go to the window, sometimes they'll start with the lights, but typically people pick an anchor and it's really scattered. But what very few people typically tell me, and again, this is pre-virus when I was doing this live, is that most people were not telling me that this is a conference room. Now, since I've been delivering this talk since the virus, I am getting a lot more conference room, and I'm getting a lot more of those kind of adverbs and kind of explanations of, more of the feel of it rather than kind of, oh, there's a table, there's this, there's this. Language also affects the answer in American Sign Language. I actually have to tell you first, it's a conference room, and then I work my way around the room. So there is definitely a language bias to this as well, but I'm going to have to test my theory on this. But this builds up to the idea of kind of the four big ideas. So the idea that we set the tone. So we're saying, hey, this is a conference room. We're working large to small. So that might be we're starting with the table. We're starting with the window. We're starting with the largest things. And we're ultimately answering the single question of what is this room? From there, we get into kind of this harder part, which is the idea of beyond the chart. It's not that one thing in there told you it was a conference room. It was the collection of all the items that work together to tell you this is a conference room. So the table, the chairs, kind of that whole beyond the chart idea. So we'll really jump into this and start thinking about kind of these principles in context. When we look at setting the tone, we're really thinking about the look, the feel, the flow, and the context. That's a lot of the information that you were starting to provide me as we were looking at that room. You were starting to say this aesthetic, it's really clean, it's modern, there's a rustic component to it. And we were really getting a sense of place from that room. And so we can do this with our dashboards as well. So this is actually that same analysis. You can see that I pulled the KPIs up to the top. You can see I've got that profit by category. I've got my map here. I'm actually going to go ahead and be a little evil and cheat and kind of spread this out a bit more. But the final piece I'm going to pull back in is some of the sales piece. And so I got to make sure I've got the right one. I'll pull this back in. You'll notice I've quieted the colors quite a bit, but there's a hidden secret to this dashboard. And I'm not going to leave it out for very long, but I'm going to kind of pull this out, see if you notice that there's a small illusion in here that I don't overtly state because I'm going to take this legend out. We don't need it. And the reason we don't need it is because I've got enough clarity, I feel, to leave it out. And so we'll kind of work through this. One of the other things that I don't know about you, I personally really struggle with a lot of these legends and I don't like them either. And so I'm going to take this out and I'm going to add something else. And so part of what I'm going to do is start pulling in additional detail to help the users really begin to navigate what I want them to understand. And so you'll see I've pulled this in. I am going to Julia Child this a little bit, skip over to my prepared oven. So I've made this dish and we'll kind of look at, if I play with this, play with the spacing and the organization of this dashboard a bit, you can see now I've got this, I've taken into account interaction. And so I've got additional detail that we can see technology is definitely outpacing furniture, but that I can start hovering over this and getting that additional detail and really seeing that data in a lot better way than the legend can provide. And because I've got profit by category, I'm actually combining these two. I'm letting them work as a single chart, even though they're two different charts. So that's kind of that, setting the tone. The other hidden secret, all my sales is blue, my profit is green, and you can see profit here, they're all in a family of green. So I'm really trying to make it explicit that, hey, anything sales is going to be blue, anything profit is going to be green. I've also given you subtle clues of if you take your mouse and you say, okay, well, I want to look at maybe this time period, you can start filtering the data using set actions and very quickly get to more information. So that's kind of another way of building it in. You can see where I've got these kind of items that called out forward. And then some of these other items, I've let them fall back so that here's the pattern, but I went ahead and dropped it out through set actions. And again, you can very quickly say, well, I want the whole thing and pull everything back in. So these are some types of functionalities that you can also use. When we get to building large to small, this is very much like an English writing assignment. You think about what is the main idea, you put in supports, and then lastly, you get into details. I also personally call this faceting. It comes from interpreting, just really taking a thing and looking at it from all angles and really explaining it so people understand it. And so we'll kind of start looking at that as well. And so this is my home temperature data. So we are total nerds. We have got sensors all throughout the house. And we did this experiment to understand, where are the warmest areas of the house? Again, we're up north, particularly when we did this data tracking, it was winter. So warmer is better than colder. Again, I know that, again, so warmer is better than colder in this instance. And so this might be kind of a view we would build for ourselves. We might say, oh, I want to look at it by this. I want to look at it by this, and start seeing using small multiples if we can get a sense of the pattern. When we start translating this to dashboards for our users, though, this type of view doesn't work. And so what we'll want to do is start kind of thinking that large to small idea. So the high level is, hey, my bedroom during the winter when it's super cold is 70 degrees, and that's a place I want to be, versus my art room, where I'm actually taking this call right now, is 65 degrees and super, super cold. So my phalanges are frozen and not working very well. And then I want to look at this by day. So I can kind of see, the variance in temperatures. You can actually get a sense of when we place the sensor versus, when we may have picked it up and checked it again. And then from there, each individual day, I can start getting a sense of those readings by day. And you can see, again, a lot of hidden interactivity. You can see where I'm going to use my legend and kind of work across the room, if you will, by using highlighting functions and just say, okay, here's, all this color. They work together as multiple pieces. But you can see I'm working from a very high level detail. What are the rooms? What are the days? What's the time of day? To the each individual microsecond reading. So these are actual readings, over a course of time. And so you can really get a sense of what's going on. And so that's kind of that high to low. The single question is probably the best covered domain. When you watch a lot of Tableau's training videos and things like that, they really focus in on how do you build better data viz. And the first thing I feel like everybody gets taught is the idea of answer a single question. It's instead of trying to tackle the world and make a dashboard that answers everything, let's really, really focus in. So that short answer, then you expand, but then you also provide detail into what's next. And what that does is it accumulates up to clarity. We start getting a better sense of what this dashboard is. So I'm going to jump to kind of this mobile dashboard. And so you can see here, standard kind of KPI numbers, they also get called bands. But really looking at, here's items, products, how many days to ship, and what kind of discount comes into place. So you already kind of start to know what I'm thinking about. And part of what I'm thinking about is shipping. I'm looking at transit time. So here's kind of that overall transit time. I've got mode, we've got press to highlight. And then we get into those individual orders that we can start kind of saying, well, what happened here? What happened here? Now, before I click the button, I do want to highlight that this was designed with mobile in mind. And so a part of what I've done is made it so that from a default, it automatically converts this to mobile. So you can see that this is using the automatic designer. And we can very quickly and easily kind of see how this dashboard will perform on a mobile standpoint, particularly thinking I'm going to use my finger. I'm going to, when I start interacting with this, I want to make sure that the points are easy for me to grasp. And so as we get here, one of the other things I want to avoid is, oh, I forgot what I was thinking about. And so rather than filtering, the actions actually pull out into a set and allow you to do a comparison. So here's everything else. Here's the particular thing I'm focused on. And so I can really start to understand the impacts of the shipping mode and see where things fall so that when I've got, first class orders, and maybe they're taking too long, I can really get a sense of what's going on. So, they're paying first class, it took 3 days. I really need to look at that. Whereas I've got some of these others that were not first class, but went faster. And so these are things I'll probably explore. So that is kind of that idea. Now, the real fun of this is that idea of moving beyond the chart. And I definitely feel like, and I really feel I was taught this way, it was very much you start that tiled layout, you drag things, and each individual chart is its own thing. I've worked with a lot of that bento box paradigm. I'm actually featuring it a fair bit in my book of, here's these templates, this thing goes in this spot, this thing goes in that spot. Everything has a nice tidy spot. They're all very clean and separated. When we start thinking beyond the chart, we're looking at exploring, we're looking at building, and we're looking at refining, but ultimately the goal is integration. We're really trying to make pieces that work together. And so here's kind of a start of that idea. And so you can see I've kind of thrown some ideas here. And so as we start looking at this type of dashboard, we may talk to folks and they say, well, we definitely want, trend over time. And then we also want some trending data down here. And so, one way we may build is we may put the things here. We may start thinking, okay, we'll put the sales piece here. For whatever reason, I'm working with a company and they've got a really big logo and we've got to have the header super huge. And that's unfortunate. And so what I may do, because I've got certain barriers that say, well, this must be so large, I'm going to start moving beyond kind of some of the literal chart and a lot of the literal training. And I'm going to break some walls. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to take this header. I'm going to put this super fancy chart in here. I'll kind of call this out and let it be different. And then within this, I've got kind of these area charts. I've got, this legend. I really don't want a legend on this composition. I don't feel like I need one. You'll notice a little bit of anti-legend sentiment. And then I'll start consolidating. But here's an opportunity. Part of what I'm doing with this is really showing kind of ratios and percentages. And so what I may do is start breaking some of the lines again. And my goal here is really to make this feel like a cohesive piece, to really let people get lost into a bit of what I'm telling them. And so I may start really blurring the lines here and make each of these pieces work together. And so again, I'm going to go ahead and do the Julia Child moment. I'm going to jump to the finished chicken, and this is our chicken dinner. And so when I sit here and play with spacing and work with everything and make it all work together, you can see that this is the final piece that, I've really kind of taken and blurred the lines between what is a chart. And that's kind of my goal with a lot of this work, is really going beyond the everything must be in its own strict confines. How can I make the charts make them actually easier to work together? How can I help the users understand all of these things are related and get a better sense together of what the relationships are? So I'll kind of jump back to this mobile piece again, and you'll see here one of the things I've done is I've put in little chart art, really. I've got these little dots. I've just added a little bit more barriers. And then within the phone layout, what I've also done is I've taken into account people are going to be using this, people are going to be scrolling. And so one thing I want to do is give them crash landing zones. So again, this is that bit of thinking beyond the chart. You can see where I've said, okay, here's where, axes are, there's some white space. Let me make it so that when somebody is using their finger, they have a safe place to land. I'm also putting in crash barriers here as well. So that way my users aren't going off the cliff. They can very easily scroll without accidentally going, oh, I'm scrolling, and now I've clicked on second class, which is not what I wanted. You can tell I have a lot of phone problems. And so with that, I want to kind of jump to some experiments I did around these ideas. So really thinking through, I watch a lot of these futuristic movies. So you think like Tron and Guardians of the Galaxy. And every time you watch these movies, they always have these dashboards on like these smoky glass displays. And it's like, what actually makes a futuristic dashboard? And so I had to kind of play with this. I put this in homage of Marauder, and I felt like every time I looked at the pattern between, okay, these are futuristic dashboards, they're these really dense, really abstract creations. And they always have circles. They always seem to stem from the middle and then branch out. And so I was like, okay, we're going to play. And so what you've got here is kind of, you've got to have the standard donut chart. And then I've got this secondary donut chart, and it all kind of coalesced together, and just really kind of breaking the lines and playing with the barriers. You'll see that, kind of with my population pyramid, I had a lot of empty space. And so I was like, okay, we're really going to fill and break lines and have everything kind of just be together. And so that gives you an idea. And secretly, there's a lot of color on this. There is a lot of ugly colors. This is not a pretty yellow, but on this piece, it works really, really well. And one of the questions I've gotten is, well, does it have to be dark to be futuristic? And I'll kind of turn that back to you and kind of ask what people here think. So I'm going to go ahead and throw up images of these so you can really see them side by side. And I'm just curious, when you look at these, does one feel more futuristic to you? And then I've also had, well, does it have to be so abstract? And I'll kind of jump in and show, here's kind of a lesser abstracted version. I mean, it's still very kind of quasi-normal, but we've got more of a standard line kind of chart or a bar chart there. We've got a little bit more standard display of data. And I mean, we're still kind of crossing some lines, but you can see where we've containerized it. We still have this on top of that. So you've still kind of got that high level view going into that detailed view, and they're still together. And this in particular was one of those areas that on the white in particular, that area got way too noisy. And so you'll notice that in the white, I really had to kick that one down because there was a lot going on. It felt very chaotic. And so this had to be more quiet for it to be on this lighter dashboard. And so that to me was really kind of the kicker of all of this, is just really playing with what makes a concept, what really sets that tone. And then you can see where all the rules kind of come into play, looking at it over time, looking at some feedback, looking at kind of demographics. So it really adheres to those rules, even though it's a very abstract creation. And so I'll move this one more time. And so with that, I am going to wrap up, but that's kind of these big ideas of setting the tone, working large to small, answering that single question, and then finally challenging everybody here to think beyond the chart, that it doesn't all have to be tidy. It can be a little bit messy and integrated. And so with that, I will open it up to questions.
So Bridget, as the questions are coming in, first off, this is really cool. Like you got so many different things, like the way that we process things visually. I love the way that you brought that to life and then kind of brought it into Tableau land. So just like, first off, that's just super cool stuff. So great start there.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then y'all, if you have questions for Bridget, I'll say this, we had folks on both sides of the fence when it came to the futuristic. There were some folks who kind of felt like they both look futuristic. Julian said they both look futuristic, but the black looks more digital and the white looks more luxurious. So I love like the adjectives and the description there. For me, I think it's trendy in our world, as you spoke to like kind of bring things into the dark and have that dark background and kind of be like, well, this is edgy because it's dark. But it's, I love the way you presented the two next to each other and so forth. So really, really cool stuff. Karen, I think you're still on with us. Any questions that you're seeing or anything else that you would like to call out? And I think you're with us. If you're not,
No, I'm still here. I'm still here. Yeah, I have to drop in just a minute. So sorry for another meeting, but
no worries.
no, I'm looking through the chat. I don't see a lot of questions, but yeah, a lot of comments on like the different designs and which one is, which one. And if someone also mentioned that Iron Viz winners seem to have dark backgrounds, which is interesting.
Yeah, I was going to call that out too, because I think not just Iron Viz, but it would also be fun to go pull up all, the Viz of the day and Viz of the week for the last, few weeks and kind of look at kind of the light versus the dark. And again, it's like, I feel like the graphic designers tend to the dark, or at least to use a color in the background in order to make things pop. And I think my hesitation in business dashboards is like, is anybody going to print this? Because we're going to make them miserable.
Exactly.
Right. So
one question, any ideas for how to change the traditional mindset and work toward more integration?
So a lot of it really, when I am dealing with companies, is I call it bad behavior. And so a lot of times I get a lot of clients and, they have in mind, we're going to build this thing. And so sometimes I'll build them exactly what they want. But, I always push them to the iPhone example. And that is, way back when, and I'm going to date myself, I had a BlackBerry and I lived and died by the BlackBerry. There was Brick Breaker, there was, little trackpad. And if you would have asked me then, how do I make that BlackBerry better? I would have said, well, I need the keyboard to do this. I need, the trackpad to do this. And what happened is at some point, Apple said, that's great. I'm going to put the keyboard in the screen. And we all have phones like this now. I mean, except for probably the rare few, but broadly, we've all moved towards the screen is on the phone. And what that allows us to do is when we don't need the keyboard, it's not there. And so to me, what I typically do is I kind of take that same approach of I can make you a BlackBerry and I can work to make this BlackBerry better. Or if you let me, I will give you an iPhone and I can really change the paradigm. And so that's where that bad behavior comes in, where sometimes I'll do two cuts of a thing where here's your, here's my extreme version. But then let me back it out into something more acceptable to you as well. And then we'll kind of iterate between there, because I find it's death by baby steps and you never get there. It's, I want to learn how to play Mozart, but I'm going to start only with Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I'm only going to listen to Mary Had a Little Lamb, and don't you dare play that sonata to me. And so that would be my advice, is that. And then there's also a wonderful book by Chip and Dan Heath called Switch. And I read that very early in my career. And it's one of those books where you learn how to motivate people. I learned that for my organization, when at the time, the best way to motivate somebody was rage. So it was very much motivating that elephant. And so I spent a lot of time before talking to them shaping the path. And then I really went in, got them hopped up and angry, hit them in the rear with a pen, and sent them running down the path I had molded.
That'll do it. Well, and, your discussion on the iPhone takes me back to Henry Ford famously said, if I had asked my customer what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so, it does sometimes take a visionary to give people the next generation. And I think that you're wise in trying to push people that way. Bridget, this has been fantastic. Really grateful for you. And if you guys want to check out more, Bridget's got an amazing Tableau public resume, portfolio, whatever you want to call it. And so much good stuff there. Bridget, anything you want to point out to people? It looks like you're making this downloadable.
This is downloadable. And the other thing is I strongly encourage people download it, play with it, and see what you would do differently. Because one of the things you'll notice throughout a lot of my work is I've played with a lot of experimentation. I spent probably more time than one human should remaking a dashboard. And that is all the talk over here is. It is purely just how many different ways can I remake the same dashboard as an intentionality exercise to think differently. And ultimately, these experiments are going into the book that's coming out.
Love it. That's awesome. Bridget, thanks so much. We'll definitely want to have you back when the book comes out and let you teach us some more in the future.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic.